Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us tonight for our next episode in our webinar series called Into the Classroom. My name is Matt Hall and I'm the Director of Marketing Admissions at the Australian International School. Part of our webinar series is designed to have a closer look at the very talented teachers that we have across our three sub-schools, to go into their classroom and to learn about what they love doing and are very passionate about on a day-to-day basis. Before I get started, just a quiet reminder to people as they come in that if you can mute your microphones, it just helps with our sound quality. Tonight's episode is interactive and you can type in the side function. We will, however, only answer the questions in the last part of the evening, so for the last half hour, but do write them as we and Angela have a discussion, because it will then be topical at the end and we will address them, which will be superb, which is a really nice part of it. Tonight, I'm very, very excited to have Angela O'Connell joining us. Angela is an expert in the elementary years where she's taught across the different year groups. She's come to us from Australia and is passionate about teaching early literacy, which I think you're going to find really intriguing. She is much loved and respected amongst her peer group and is the head of our prep year at the Australian School. So welcome along, Angela.
Thank you, Matt. Very nice things you said about me, and I'm glad to be here.
Wonderful. Now, just for everyone here, can you, and I've stolen a little bit of your thunder, but can you tell us part of your journey prior to coming to AIS and where we come to today?
Sure. So I started off teaching actually in the higher levels in grade 6, and I've actually sort of sequentially worked my way down. Prep was really the last frontier for me. So I loved teaching the upper years. I kind of put off going to the younger years, but then as I had my own children, I thought it might be something interesting because I did at the time have my own son who was 5 years old, and I thought maybe I can do this prep business. So that's where I came from. I was working at PYP schools in Australia, and also doing some leadership roles there as well.
Yes, and that's sort of part of the a progression for some teachers. It can be a little frightening going from the upper elementary down to our very beginners. And you talked about, when me and you had our discussions coming into this, how excited you were, especially having a son, but looking at early literacy. And we've had this beautiful conversation. The slide that we have up there, it's called The Science of Reading. And I really am intrigued to unpack this and for you to share your in-depth knowledge of this. Could you talk us through this and talk the audience through your thinkings?
Yeah, sure. So I, well, first of all, a leadership position came up in prep, and I thought I really want to go for that. But my fear was that I didn't know enough about teaching reading. And I don't remember how I learned how to read. I just learned how to read. And so I started thinking, well, how do you teach young children? Because I taught in the upper years, they come to you already reading. So really the focus can be around comprehension. But my thought was, well, what happens though when you get a child who doesn't know how to read? Where do you start? And so I did a lot of research and actually a few educational journals, but also a lot of it was coming out in the news, this idea of reading wars coming back in. That's been going on for a long time. A lot of talk around phonics, and this actually is part of the science of reading. It's just one key area. But if you look in the media in Australia, there's been a lot of debate about reading, and it is coming out, and you'll hear this science of reading term. So that's where I started, and that's really kind of what led me onto this journey.
I like the way that you say that, because for the audience's sake, it was about the discussion was about how children acquire reading. And then there's a couple of different lines of thinking that they had there. And some of that is some of the debates about if you just immerse children in literacy, others about a very deliberate reading program. And I think that's where you're coming from, isn't it? Is the very deliberate reading program that you've put in place.
Yeah, it's a very complex. I actually thought, it'll be easy to find out how to teach reading. It was anything but that, and it can be a very emotive subject as well. People can have very fierce opinions on how they think reading should be taught. So yeah.
I love, and I've just changed the slide here because I think this beautifully gives the background to the science of reading. So I'll let you share.
Sure. So the science of reading, it's important to know, it's not a philosophy, it's not a program you can go and buy. It refers to research that has been done by reading experts, specifically cognitive scientists, and it's about how we learn to read. So it's really involved in what's going on in the brain when you're reading. There's 3 key studies that are often referred to when we're talking about the science of reading, but it's not limited to these ones. But the first one is from the USA. It's the National Reading Panel Report. So they have very similar discussions in the USA about reading. And back in 1996, Congress said we want to find out how reading works. So that's one of their reports. This report is also backed up by the National Inquiry into Teaching of Literacy from Australia. That was in 2005. And then you have the Rose Report, which is from the UK from 2006. And all of them came up with 5 key areas of reading, which you can see in the yellow. And I've added on there because since then, most people agree that oral language also plays a very important part. So it was thought of as the Fab 5. It now is thought of as the Big 6 of reading. And so I'll just talk you through a little bit what they are in a nutshell. It's a bit more complex, but phonemic awareness is basically the ability to hear and manipulate sounds. So, for example, the word cat is made up of the sounds k, at. So children need to be able to hear that. And then phonics building on from that is connecting the sound to the grapheme, so the letters. So knowing C commonly makes a k sound. Fluency is just what it sounds like when you're reading. You're a natural reader. You do it with automaticity. You can add expression, which really frees you up to understand what you're reading. Vocabulary, as you can imagine, is understanding words. And having a good vocabulary is really important for early reading because it actually helps you decode words, which we'll talk about a little bit later. Comprehension is obviously that's what we want to get out of reading. It's the whole reason why we read. But oral language is really important at all parts because it does help children understand that words are made up of sounds. It helps them learn grammar through speaking. So oral language forms a really important part. And as you can see there, the implications are really that reading is not easy and it's not actually a natural skill. It was thought before that you could teach it like you teach language, where if you talk to children, they'll learn to speak, and that's true. But for reading, that's not the case, and a lot of research has shown it actually does need to be quite explicit. And children will not learn how to read just by being read to, although that can help them. That it will not actually help them read.
There's so much about what you've just said that I was thinking to jump in the whole way. What's beautiful is that you can see that there's quite a flow from starting with the phonetic awareness, building up skills, the phonics, the fluency, the vocab, the comprehension. It does seem a structure going down. I really enjoy what you're saying there.
Yeah.
And what's really important is that, like you say, it's research-based, right? We know now, so it's kind of, in my view, it's not really a debate anymore. It's more this is what the research shows. This is what we should be doing. And it's certainly what you put in place in your classroom, isn't it?
Yeah, it definitely is. And it's something that we have worked across the year level to put in place. And it's having a flow-on effect for the rest of the school as well, which is really positive.
I want to go on to this next slide here that you've got for us, because I think this ties together, like you say, those 6 areas that you piece together in a beautiful, lovely illustration that I'll let you describe to the audience.
Yes. Well, I wish
how they come together.
Credit for the illustration, but it's not mine. It's by Scarborough, and I think it really highlights the idea that reading is not a simple process. It is quite complex. So if you can see at the thinner part of the rope there, that's where we want to get our students to be, and that's where you and I are right now. We're skilled readers. But for children, if you look at the bottom one where it's around word recognition, you've got the arrow, it becomes increasingly automatic. So over time, children at the beginning, they'll start, it's not very automatic, but you do need to have good phonological awareness. You need to be able to decode, so you need to know the alphabetic code, knowing the sounds.
Yes.
You need to have some stored sight words, which we'll talk about a little bit later. And then on the same other end, you're working on that language comprehension the whole time, and that becomes increasingly strategic over time. So you can see that there's a lot of things involved in reading, which just highlights why it's so important that we teach this skill explicitly.
And I like that. It's very hard like you said beautifully at the start. How did I learn to read? How do I remember this? We're such fluent readers now. We've got so many skills that our brain is processing at a lightning speed when we decode text. You guys are at that very start of going back to the very beginning where the understanding is, like you beautifully said, they can hear, speak words, they know the oral language, and they can see that, and they can see words have meaning on beautiful books that parents think and share. But you guys then start to break down the skills that they need to learn at that very deliberate stage. I really like that, and I like the way that it's broken down into a rope, it just makes sense, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's a great illustration. It's you'll see it a lot referenced in Science of Reading websites. So yeah, I think it highlights that importance and just how complex it is for children, what we're actually teaching them to do.
I like that. I love that a lot. I'm going to go on to, because this is where you go down to breaking that rope down, right? And this is you starting at the start, and you've got some beautiful stories to share around this.
Yeah. So one thing that we're becoming efficient skilled readers. We've talked about that. You and I, we can look around the room, see words, instantly read them. And what this is orthographic mapping is it's a theory. It's a process, a mental process that you go through when you're reading. And the research shows that you actually read in units. You don't read a word as a whole. So that idea that you would just memorize sheep and just memorize letters and see it as a whole is not how you would store words. So the average literate adults has 30,000 to 70,000 words automatically stored in their brain. So it would be impossible for you to have stored that as an entire unit. So what you're actually doing is you're mapping the letters to the pronunciation. And there's a few different examples of how they prove that. Like, for example, you still see this word when I write it in capitals. So you're still mapping those sounds to those words. So you see the word bed as the-ed, and you've mapped it, and then you know it straight away. Same as sheep, you see that the S and H makes a sh sound, and you almost do it without even noticing. So our prep students some of them won't be doing this yet, but as they get older, a child might only need to hear the word, to map that word one time or 1 to 4 times, and then it's stored permanently in your brain and you get access later. But to be able to do this, you have to have phonemic awareness. So you need to be able to hear the sounds in words, and you need to know which sounds can be represented by which letters. So that's what we're doing in the foundation level. We're really setting that up, and it's really key that we help children learn to decode words properly, because then this process will start to happen in their brain.
Now I'm going to jump on a couple of things. Now you beautifully said then, so you said let's unpack this for the parent. Step 1, you talked about the alphabet, and you said a beautiful word. What you said the alphabet. What's it just called? When each of the letters in the alphabet has its own sound.
So it's like you're knowing the grapheme representation, then the sound, phoneme grapheme correlation. So you know that B makes the B sound. Sorry, B makes the B sound.
So you're starting off with the very basic alphabet and the very basic one-to-one code of each letter.
Yeah.
Is that I'm correct in saying that?
In a foundation classroom, we start off teaching a simple code, which is your A to Z. And then you start to add in more of the complex code, which is your digraphs. And digraphs, like SH, is a digraph because it makes one sound. So when you put them together, you only hear one sound, but it's represented by two letters. So English is very complex, as you can imagine. That's why it's so important to be explicit with it.
And that's what it's such a good example that you've got there, because the first one with bed is you simply are using their single sounds per letter to make up that word, and then you've got quite lovely, and then you can imagine, so once they've got those 20 sounds sorted, they now are making the combinations through the digraphs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then that's where we get into all sorts, isn't it? Because the different letter combinations get quite complex, don't they?
Students will start to teach themselves words. So even Z has an irregular part in the middle, and the D is regular. If you just told them that AI makes the sound in here, then they'll learn to map that. And when they come up to that word again, like captain, they might give it a go, and then they go, I've figured it out. And they start to teach themselves words. And there's a theory that we teach most of the words we know, we teach ourselves. But we need, once we've got this into place, and I see it with preps, they start to take off, and they're like, you've taught them how to do it, read by decoding, and all of a sudden they just take off, they get it. Whereas others will need a lot more time. Each child's a bit different.
And that's the beautiful thing too, and I think that that's something wonderful. Children don't learn on a beautiful linear line,
No.
We even know our boys and girls can learn at quite different linear lines as such, isn't it?
Yeah, well, interestingly, though, if you're going on the boys, a bit of research show that science of reading, we once thought that boys are just not as good at reading as girls. But when you have these, you apply the science of reading, actually completely closes the gap. So boys just probably tend to need a bit more explicit instruction. Not all boys, though. I've got some exceptions where I've seen boys that are just fantastic readers as well, like girls. So
yes, and it's quite good that you jump in there, because there can be a lot of gendered generalizations that simply aren't the case, right? And that stops the teachers and the parents carrying on that myths, saying, right, science says this, teach them this way, and they learn to read as well. I think that you've got that really nice for the parents, so that they're learning those single sounds, then they're going on to their digraphs and trigraphs, and you're saying that when they've got those tools, they then can take off quite quickly themselves.
That's right.
I like that. Let's have a look at this next slide. So I think that this, you've got some beautiful imagery here. Can you talk us through what's going on, some of these different ones? The very first group I'm interested in there's a teacher there with, it looks like two little girls, and they're going through something. Talk us through.
Yeah, and I think there's another one coming. So these we're using in the foundation classrooms decodable books. And what makes a decodable book different to some of the other books, and I'll show you some of the other books that we used to, that you might see in other classrooms, and that we're sort of looking at what is the best for our students. And this is a decodable. This was a simple one that we would have started the year with. It's called The Map. And when you look at the front, you go in, and this book will only contain sounds that the students have been taught. So we go through it, they go and then we sound out the words. And it will have a few words that are tricky words, which you have to have for a story to make sense. So it's got I, and I is a bit tricky because at this stage of the year, children will have been taught that the I sound makes an it sound, but in the word I, it makes the long sound. So the idea is that when students go and read, they're not actually having to guess any words. They can actually use their sounding out strategies to figure out the words. So this child would go I, am, it's sis. I am sis. So the pictures, although they match, you can't guess what the word is, and we really only want, the only strategy we want in a foundation classroom and probably in early years is to sound it out. So this replaces some of those other strategies where children might be encouraged to guess what the word is based on the picture. And I've been guilty of doing that myself as well, thinking it was the best thing. But if I compare this book to, this is a repetitive language book. It's called Hoppity Hop. And if you have a look at I'll read the story for you. Yes. We can hop, said the frogs. We can hop, said the rabbits. We can hop, said the penguins. So likely would happen is the child can't read the words at first and you're telling them. And then what happens is they figure out what the book is going and they just start saying the words. They're not actually paying attention to any of the words. They're not really reading at all. They just know that they have to recognise what the picture is and they can just remember the rest of the words. So this versus this, where they're really applying what they've learnt, it's a huge difference.
When we were talking the other day, this was groundbreaking to me. I know it seems such a simple one because coming from an elementary background, I taught exactly that strategy, right? I'm feeling, now you're making me feel dreadful. I'm thinking I got this wrong, which is, now that's really, I've got to be really clear for the parents what that is. So the way, and that's why you said you taught it, the way that we were most likely taught was a lot of this, predict the word from the picture.
Yes.
Hear the rhyming pattern, right? And
yes.
And then play along. Whereas you're saying and I'd say this to the parent, if there's one takeaway tonight, that's not what we want you to do.
No, it's been a real shift that we want to see, because if we talk about that previous slide where you're mapping the sound, you only get to do that if you are actually reading the whole word and paying attention to the letters. If you're guessing and just looking at the first letter, then their brain's not given an opportunity to map it. And so that's the whole purpose of these books. They are stepping stones before you get onto other books. Some criticisms are that they can be a little bit boring. They do become more complex. I've got Matt and the fish. And this one, you can see another one, it's got the vet is sick, and it also has a more complex code, so digraphs. But the purpose of these books is to reinforce that letter sound correspondence for children as they're reading.
And I really like that. It seems so simple, but this is terrific. It's showing, which is really nice, because these are the little take-home readers as well that they will take home with them. So that makes it really nice and explicit for the parent at home. These are the sounds that we need to go over that the child's learning.
Yes.
And then those exact sounds are practiced, and each time you want them to cognitively think of the sounds, not to be predicting, not to be listening for a rhyme, those very simple.
Yeah, so I think some of the feedback I've had from parents is they really enjoy these books because you're not trying to force a child to, here's another one, if it went home, it's got the word playing. First of all, a prep child at the start of the year is unlikely to have been taught that AY makes an A sound. They're unlikely to have been taught that the ing sound, which is very nasal, complex.
Yes.
Right. So you really, the likelihood of a child being able to work this out is hard. Although there are some children that come into school just knowing how to read, and some children will do that. They somehow crack the code. But most will not know, would not know how to attack that word or figure it out.
And what I love about looks like the whole series is it's just beautifully building on skill, on skill, on skill, on skill, with it's a perfectly increasing degree of difficulty that a child can handle while practicing past ones.
Yeah.
Now, listen, though, there's a lot more going on in this slide. So talk us through the very next one where you've got a whole group of children.
Yes, so we're doing So decodable books are just one part of our program. It's
Right.
not only, we do want them to, our ultimate aim is for children to enjoy reading. So we expose them to really rich texts. So these are some of our books, and we unpack the vocabulary in them.
Right.
We are using Initiate, which is a science of research-backed program, and all of our teachers have gone through training at Macquarie University. And one of their programs is they've selected a lot of books for us with keywords to unpack. So children will read the book, we'll talk about the word shrinking, children will act it out. They really love that story time element because vocabulary is one of the key areas that you need to explicitly teach as well as part of a quality program.
I really like that too. That's really, really interesting. So what you're saying is you've got your little books that are practicing the sounds and the digraphs, which is part of it. Then you've got the enjoyment of literacy with some books that have been selected by experts that guide you guys with some really good learnings for each child.
Yes.
That must make it. Can you show us, just read us through a part of it? Because I love to hear some of these. So just if you choose one and read a little bit about it and just give us a bit of example of how this would play out in a classroom.
Well, normally you would say read the whole book.
Yes.
And that's the first part. And we would retell the story, what happened in the beginning, what happened at the middle, or at the end. So we're developing comprehension as well during that time. So, but it's an oral listening task. So children are really engaged. And then the next time you might come across the word. So we do, the bear was in a grumpy mood. And then I might give them a scenario. I might say, okay, if this would make you grumpy, show me a grumpy face. If it wouldn't, your head. So it might be, your brother stole your toys, and they'll all give me a grumpy face. You got everything you want for your birthday. They would shake their hand. So we kind of acted out a little bit. The great thing, there was one word that was staring, and my kids loved that one, and they would come up to me and they'd just go, "Miss O'Connell, I'm staring at you." And they use it in a sentence. So, and we'll use it throughout the week. And I still notice they'll still keep using those words.
I really enjoy that. And again, it gives a consistency across, because how many classrooms are there in prep now? How many?
Yes, 7 classes.
Which is beautiful. So because you guys are following a program and a structure, it consistently means that all the children are getting the same degree of literacy teaching, isn't it?
Yeah, it's really good. And it's also just built our teacher knowledge and confidence. Yeah. The teachers, have learnt a lot from using the program daily. Yeah. It's been amazing.
I really enjoyed it. Now, the very last, you got the last picture there. You've got the pod libraries. Can you just?
Oh yeah, the incidental teaching, the natural language book, because we do recognise that some children, I mentioned that before, come in somehow knowing how to read, whether they've been taught or whether they've just sort of picked it up on their own. So sometimes they may not need to use a decodable book. We do make sure that we assess them quite thoroughly to make sure that they do know all those grapheme representations quite accurately. And if not, we go into like a more natural language text. So this means that it won't have the phonic regulation of your decodable text. So this is an example of one. And what you would do is a bit of incidental teaching of sounds that the child might have not know how to attack it. For example, this one's got the word water buffaloes, which could be a bit tricky, and plough, because O-U-G-H can make several different sounds. So you might say, in this word, it's making an owl sound. Can you think of any other words that are spelt like that? And that would just reinforce that spelling. So that's what we use. So we are very conscious of differentiating for all the levels of our readers.
Yeah, I really like that. And that's, it seems obvious, but that's true. You're not making the fluent reader sit there and do the digraphs and sounding when they've already grasp it.
Yes.
I like that. And then you go on to the very last one there. You got the pod libraries.
Yeah.
Through these.
Pod libraries are fabulous. We have them in every level. And they just have picture storybooks, which children are welcome to go and choose and come and bring back during reading time. If, for example, they were doing some independent reading and they wanted to read a different book, they can go and choose one. So it's really about fostering an interest in the books, even though they may not be able to read that book because it will be more natural language as well. They love, it really promotes that oral language because they can talk with a partner, look at the pictures, what do we see? So it's all about developing that love of reading. So we're really giving them lots of different options in reading. It's not just we're just reading decodable books.
Yeah. And I think that's a really important. You're giving them a structure. You're teaching them a deliberate structure, so they're all got that background, but at the same point, you're understanding it's the enjoyment of a book and a story and I like that. And I think I know you said that one criticism is they can sound boring perhaps to a fluent reader, but when I'm a little reader learning to read, how proud they are when they can read those stories, right?
They get so excited when they start to read a word to put it back together. They sound it out and they put that word back together and you're like, yes, you got it. So it is exciting and affirming for them, and the book may seem like it's not that exciting to you as an adult, you're right, but I think it's probably the kids enjoy them. Yeah,
there's absolutely. Now we're going to tie this together. Last slide's my favorite, right? This last slide is my favorite. It kind of speaks for itself. I hope the audience can see these, but can you talk us through this, because this is wonderful.
So it's the whole of what we're doing is transferring across curriculum areas. So our students are now becoming writers. They are applying the letter sounds that they've been taught, and some of them know different sounds as well, so they're having a go. So you can see in this first one, she's written, I saw a cat, and when you're an early educator, you become very good at decoding what a child is trying to write, because the first couple of times I've read it, but she's written frightened. She can hear right in the frightened. That's the dominant part, so she's written that. And I also saw a rabbit, and I liked it. And I've got another one here that just to show you in person, because just to show you a progress from the start of the year. This is this is a prep child on their first day of writing. They know that letters are supposed to be on the page, but they don't know where to put them, and that's very typical of an emergent writer. And then this is her most recent piece of writing. And if you think, we've only really been at school for that, teaching writing. So she's written, when dogs are sad, you can play with. I love this. She's written with them, and you can feed it. But she's done, she's figured out a lot in a small time, including how text works. She's got finger spaces in between her words. She's even figured out there's a full stop at the end. So it's shown we've seen amazing progress in our writers as well. And then you can see it also applies to our inquiry. So we've been learning about living things, and students went outside for a walk, and then they drew some pictures and labelled their pictures as well. So you can see snails are there and grass and all sorts of things. So I think what's most exciting is that they are transferring this learning to other areas as well.
And that's something I'm going to jump on, because that's the real importance of teaching the code to reading is that, like you say, now when they go next to becoming writers, they have a toolkit to make words.
Yeah. So one of the favourite strategies the kids love doing with me is so it's oral segmenting a word. So you'll say the word is, I'll say, what's the word? It's bat. And they'll say bat. And I'm like, what are the sounds you can hear in bat? And we'll go b, at, bat. And then they apply that. So you can do that with many other things. So it's kind of like the opposite of decoding. It's called encoding. So you're applying the same, almost the reverse skills when you're sounding out and blending back together. You're pulling apart the word into its individual phonemes. So that's something they've really learnt. And with explicit teaching, they're becoming very good at their spelling as well.
And that's what's so beautiful about this, is that we know that reading and writing are the inverse of each other, like you said, working backwards. It's nice for parents to hear, perhaps if their children are writing at home and they want to know how to spell something, that perhaps instead of just giving it to them.
Yeah, always ask what sounds can you hear. Some children will struggle with the middle sound for a while.
Yeah,
that's the hardest one. They'll always hear the first sound, but if you can say let's say the word and what are the sounds we can hear.
And that's just such a and like you say, they might not get the middle sounds, they might not get all of them, but making them stop and think instead of just getting the answer, like how do you spell that, you're engaging their brain and thinking, which I really liked when you said that. Can you just tell me, so you said what you said is when they go out, what was the sequence to this lessons that you had here? You've got the beautiful diagrams of the butterflies and things. What were you doing in your actual classroom program that led to this?
Yeah, so we're learning Sharing the Planet. It's an inquiry units, and we're doing a main focus on living things and what they need to survive. We were really fortunate that we got to go on an excursion down to Chuan Park before the current situation, and our students just went for an exploration of what can you see that is living. And they had we unpacked what a living thing was. Our kids said that something that is alive, like people, animals, or plants. That's the prep's definition of that. So that I let them come up with, we developed it together based on their ideas, and we talked about what does it need, and their ideas were food, water, sunlight, air, and a home. That's what most living
things. That's frighteningly good. That's absolutely amazing. I come from a science background. I'm secondary. That's brilliant that prep have come up with that.
Yeah, they know a lot about living things, but they also have some misconceptions which are very cute as well. Like, if you say if it moves the clock moves, is the clock alive? You might go, yes, it is, or no, it isn't. But yeah, they do know a lot about living things, and they're very interested in it as well. It's one of our favourite units. Kids always love learning about living things.
I like the way that you just said you let them have a misconception. You had a misconception, but you hear them, and then you question deeper. I like you're doing it with now, which we're all listening to, which must make you a beautiful teacher. Is you're letting them make the mistake, and then you're questioning a bit more. Yeah, which I really think is great. So we've got this here now. The big question is going to be I'm going to ask it on behalf of the parents, is how can they help their child with language acquisition, not just reading but writing? What things can they do at home? What's your advice, thoughts, ideas? I'm putting you on the spot.
There's lots of things. I mean, I kind of think about what do I do. So the obvious one is reading with your child, and it doesn't have to be them reading to you. One of the best things you can do is read to your child, particularly when they're younger. But there's also a misconception that it should stop as they get older. Reading to children as they get older is always a fabulous thing to do. I can remember my year sixes saying to me, when are you going to read the novel to us? Because reading is, it's a listening comprehension task. So when they're listening to you read, they're taking in a story. If you've got younger students, really focus on that phonological awareness, which is rhyming words, because a lot of research indicates if you've got good phonological awareness, you'll be better at reading. So some things I do, I've got a little 4-year-old. We like to play a game where I say it's time to go to bed, and she'll guess the word I'm saying. So you can break it up into onset and rhyme. The onset is the first sound, the rhyme is the ending part of the word. I do that with her because if I was to say she's probably not quite ready there. So, but you can play little games like time to brush your teeth, and that will help with your phonological awareness. So And the other thing I'd say that you can really, really do is talk to your children, have conversations with them, try and put the phone down, get off your laptop. I'm guilty of that. And especially if they're trying to engage with you. Often if we say, how was your day? I'll get the good. But if they're wanting to really tell you something, I think it's really important to stop and listen and have that conversation, because that will build oral language. And that's just a really good way to just bond with your child as well, which is going to set them up for later success as well.
I really liked that. I discussed so much about what you're saying. I'm sure that you've got a plethora of lovely little activities that they can do. But you said something at the very start, and I really want to resonate this. At the beginning, when a child, they're putting so much energy into decoding each word that they simply aren't getting comprehension yet, because they're trying to unpack each and every one. Now, you just said something brilliant then, and the importance of a parent reading to their children. You are freeing them up from the decoding. So now they can practice the comprehension without having to have the intense effort of each page. So that's that's gorgeous, isn't it?
And when you're reading, you can, you come across a page and like the grumpy, you can stop and go, oh, why do you think they're grumpy? And have that conversation with your child. And sometimes they don't want to hear the story. They're focused on one page, and they sort of talk about everything they can see on that page. I would definitely take advantage of that when a child's really interested in a page. You don't have to read the whole book. If they just want to talk about it, you're building that love of literacy there.
My own daughter loved the stories at bedtime as well, but she always had a knack of choosing the very longest longest book she could find. And I remember trying to trick her a few times by missing a few pages.
I do that too.
Yeah. It's like, oh my goodness. No, we had to go back. But one principal once said to me once, which I thought was a really good takeaway for all parents. It takes 1,000 books to be read to a child for them to learn to read. And that's not they're trying to learn it. But I thought that, and she said, it depends on when you start that 1,000 books.
Yeah. Well, they're never too early to read. So you can start reading to children from a baby. I know they're not going to understand the story, but you're exposing them to sounds. They're hearing the way that speech goes up and down. So I can remember when I had my son, the health nurse said, make sure you start reading to him from a young age. At the beginning, it felt a bit silly. You're reading to someone who can't move, but I think my son loves reading, so maybe that played a role in it.
Oh, there's no maybe, and that's the beautiful thing. There's no maybe in that. That's where that 1,000 books comes in. Yeah. It shows that you love books, doesn't it? It shows that you value literacy. And I'll say to dads as much as mums, it makes a nice story, doesn't it?
Yeah, and my husband does really good silly voices, so add some silly voices if you can. Kids love that. I'd probably say in my classroom, the most peaceful part of the day in a prep classroom is when we sit down for story time. You will not, kids do not roll around, they're just engrossed on that book. Kids just love hearing a story. It always works.
Oh gosh, I think you're very infectious just listening to you with your passion talking about this, which is nice. I think what we will do now, because it does we've got about 15 minutes left. If parents have got any questions that they'd like to ask Angela about early literacy, or just even what's going on in her classroom, if you've got prep yourselves, please type the questions in. We're starting to get some here. I'll read out one. Jummy's written, thank you, Angela, for sharing how the reading skills scaffold. This really affirms my understanding. That's really nice. Carolyn's written, I think she's saying the digraph chip.
I think so too. CH is a tricky one because it can make a sh sound. Often in French words.
Right.
So maybe that's where she's coming from. Like children, when you're trying to teach them the ch sound, I always get someone say, "But what about Charlotte?" Because Charlotte makes a sh sound.
Yeah, which is, there's nothing wrong with that, is there? It's not always a rule. Like the English is one of the most difficult languages to learn in around the globe, because we were made up of so many different languages that came together from Latin, from our different areas. So it is complex.
Yeah, and that's why it needs to be taught explicitly. It's one of the deep orthography. It's a bit different to your shallow ones, which, for example, I think German has less irregularities, so it would be easier to learn. But because we have so many different spellings that we borrowed from different languages, it is quite complex. Yeah.
I'm loving this. Let me get here. What have we got here? So we're getting some things coming through. We've got one here from Sarah. Thanks, Angela. Are there any books you recommend for at home to help my child's reading?
I'm wondering if you mean like picture storybooks. There's always some really great, the classics.
Yes.
Very sad news today. Eric Carle passed away today, but the Hungry Caterpillar and all those books are fantastic. Choosing quality storybooks are really good. If they're reading at home, and it depends on their level, it would be, I would say, in earlier classroom decodable books. There are decodable books that go on up into upper years as well for those children that still need it.
I think one bit of advice I would give to all parents is your local librarian. Librarians are passionate about reading, and almost all the books there are pretty good because they've chosen them, right? They know what's pretty good for a young reader.
Yeah.
And that might be a starting point for them. I've got another one here from Carolyn. I'm your sister, and it's very confusing for my kids. Not quite sure what you mean there, Carolyn, but we might come back. We've got another one for Nolan. When your child struggles with a particular word in a story, at what point would you suggest giving it into the urge to help? Oh, that's a great one.
Yeah, and I know Nolan. I teach his daughter. So hi, Nolan.
Oh, right.
Good question. You would want to allow wait time. It is a bit hard. So you obviously for sounding out a word. So I'll talk about words that are decodable. Give them a chance. Well, all words are actually decodable, but the words that they may have been taught to decode.
Yep.
I would give them some wait time, get them to repeat the sounds, and then if they're struggling, then that's when you model. I'll do it. Cat. With a sight word, like a tricky words, like an ant, if they're not getting it, you just give them a little bit of wait time, and then you tell them the word. So it is okay to step in at times. You don't want a child to become frustrated, and you don't want to say, come on, you can do it. Sometimes they need you to model it.
I think that's a very nice way of doing it. You want to still make it enjoyable, make them do some thinking, and then move on with it, right? They're going to get them in the future. I've got more here questions that everyone's getting involved here. I knew that once the periods got started, they'd be away because it's such a wonderful topic. Will you be able to, I've got another one here from Vanessa. Will you be able to share how you get the children more engaged with the text?
Yeah, I think you need to think, I'm assuming talking about when you're reading, maybe at home, choose the right time of day as well. Sometimes just before we're going to bed isn't the best time. Maybe find out something that they're interested in. Boys tend to, and girls as well, but silly stories. Like I said before, if you put in on those voices, really, if you as an adult read with expression, children love that. If there's a part of a text where the character's yelling, then really yell, they find it hilarious. So just try and model how much you love reading, and I think that will flow on. But yeah, choosing the right books can be a great start as well.
I think that's great, all great advice. Vanessa's gone on to say, will you have another session on writing too?
I'll make someone else do that one.
we might come back to the prep, and then we will ask another prep teacher to look at the writing as well. But she's already started to talk about it before with the parent. Remember when we said that get the love of the story, get them to write something, and then to use that same phonological understanding to sound out words, have a crack, enjoy it. I like that as well. I'm going to go on to, we've got another one here from Katrina. The digraph NG sound is also challenging for us Filipinos, even if we have the sound in our Filipino alphabet. I think it's really more on the exposure to how children could utter sounds. Thank you for the expertise. I
think that's pronunciation as another element of how difficult English is too. Even for, I worked with quite a few New Zealand teachers. If you're saying the et sound, it can sound very different to how we would say it. So we might be saying the word pig, it might sound like peg to a child. So I think that's always something you just have to be, pronunciation of sounds, they can be a bit different. But English is English, and I think, I've had parents, this is a very multicultural classroom. So even we've had discussions about the word a, whether it should be pronounced as an a or a, depending on where you're from, you'll say it very differently.
Right, and that's, I like the way you say that. Let's just address one at a time. We've got this one now, and what we're doing the English lesson, we're going to look at this one. There are a lot of children that are growing up in families where they've got more than one language. So the children are learning to speak in two different languages for a start off, right?
Yeah.
And you've got a number of children who come into your own classrooms they're learning English. They've come in perhaps from a completely different language and are learning English from day one in your classroom.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yeah, they're just immersed in the language.
Yes.
They may come in with limited knowledge or some knowledge. And so teaching them pronunciations of sounds is important as well. But yeah, we all say, particularly, I suppose it's very different. It's one of the good things about being over here as opposed to Australia. I don't really notice accents as much as what, if you're in Australia and you pronounce, if you're a New Zealander in Australia, you might get a lot of grief for the way that you pronounce your words. But over here, it's just we all have different pronunciations and slight different ways that we pronounce. I've had people tell me that I need to work on my pronunciation of Prata. It's not Prada, the brand, because as an Australian, you tend to make some of your t and your d sound similar. So, yeah, it's just one of those things.
I think it's wonderful. I've got another question here from Jimmy. She's got a good one. Do you have any suggestions on how to bridge inventive spelling on how they are really spelling? Thanks, Angela.
That's a really good question. I think when children are first starting out, I think the inventive spelling is quite important. You don't want to be pulling up a child every saying this, but then I think, if you're looking at a sound and that digraph, we start to go, give them a few words where they can practice sounding out that word and have a go at implementing that sound. I also think it's a little bit of that incidental teaching. So we do writers' workshop and we do conferences. So if I'm working with a group of students, I notice someone spelt something a little bit inventive, I might actually say, oh, I can see how you spelt it that way. It actually sounds like that. But actually, we spell it with this letter combination, and here's another couple of words, and that can be all that some children need, is to start to do that. Interestingly, some children seem to read those words perfectly and then they don't apply it to their writing. But I think the more of the decoding, the more likely they're going to start to really get that in their brain and then apply it to their writing.
And I think it's just with parents is don't rush the process. You don't have to go to step 10 straight away. Start at step 1.
Yeah. So I see some of that spelling, and I think, a child that's written frighten as right is actually really impressive. And she's written was with an O as well.
Yeah, yes.
Which is what she's hearing at them, and eventually we'll get to at that particular time we hadn't learnt the word was, which is one of the irregular spellings. So the next time, now that she knows that word, I would probably say to her, "Oh, let's go and check our word wall with the tricky word. Do you think you could change the spelling to that one?" But she's, sometimes inventive spelling is really impressive because she has applied her letter sounds. She's used that time. She's done the oral segmenting. It's just she doesn't know that you can A and S can make an Oz because English.
I think it's wonderful that you're just saying this. And what the big takeaway will be is it's immerse the children in it, do lots of practice. They're seeing, hearing it. You guys are starting with a structure for them to decode on their own if they need to have a go, sound out themselves, which is brilliant. I think it's such a great structure. I'll sort of one more for the parents. You've got one more last chance. We've got a couple of minutes left. So if you do have a burning question, you've got about 3 minutes to get it from Angela. One interesting strategy that I gained from this one principle was really into literacy. She just said, if you are reading to the children, do trace with your finger, because when you're reading out loud, then they can see the sounds of each of those new words that you might be. So even if you're reading out, I thought that was just quite nice for the kids.
Also, we might assume that children know the difference between a word and a picture.
Right.
It may not actually be. So one of our early lessons is actually a word. This, you pick it. This is a word. This is a picture. Because it may, to a mind, it's just symbols all over a page. So it's also really important to point that out as well.
I like that. Yeah, absolutely. We've got 2 questions that we'll do these last 2, and then we will go off. Do you do profiling of your readers? Like some are advanced while others are emergent readers. Do you do differentiated reading instruction? If yes, can you tell us about it? You kind of touched on this during it, but yes.
Yes, so we do. We find out where our students are reading at the beginning. So we do quite a few assessments throughout the year. We have some students who come in already reading. Some children will do that. So we do find out though, are they reading because they understand the letter sound combinations, or have they memorized some words? So we do make sure that they're definitely reading, and then we find out what would their point of need be. So that's when I talked about these are natural language texts. So those students wouldn't necessarily have to go into a decodable reader. We would give them different types of text, and we'd probably be focusing with those students if they're really naturally decoding, they're reading with fluency, then probably what we're looking at is vocabulary development and comprehension development. So we would be teaching them in that setting. So we have a number every year. This happens in prep. You have students who are at different levels. And on the other end, we also have some students that we know are going to need a little bit more time. So there's also support systems in place for them as well.
I love the way you say that. I think, listen, I'm going to wind it up here, and it's beautifully said, I think, by Jane here. She said, I love the way you've spoken about the explicit way we need to teach reading, but also that fostering a love of reading, which is important across all year levels. Thanks, Angela. And a very last one from Joanna. Thank you for the informative presentation. And Jummy's right, last one now. Thank you for the very informative session. I love inventive spelling and all the process behind from a child's mind. Have a great evening, Angela, Matt, and Michelle. Thank you very much, Angela. You've been an absolute sport. Love talking to you. And for everyone else, thanks for joining us and being such an engaging audience. Enjoy the rest of your evening. And as well as we can, if you are in Singapore, if you're around the world, please get in contact and we'll help you with the process of enrolling at AIS. So take care.
Thanks.
See you all around. Bye-bye.
Thanks.